Here's Ben Shapiro to whine about being held accountable for the gross nonsense he says all the time.
Ben Shapiro, you're followed by millions of people online and on social media. You're one of the biggest names in American conservatism. What is it you think you're tapping into?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. One, there is actually a hunger for different ideas. The monolithic nature of the United States media is pretty evident in terms of its politics. People tend to agree on essentially the liberal point of view and increasingly a radical leftist point of view in the media.
I find this notion hard to square with the fact that Fox News is the most watched news channel on the planet and that conservatives have a near monopoly on talk radio. There does not at all seem to me to be a shortage of conservative media. And even when it comes to less conservative media like CNN, there doesn't seem to be the same level of explicit advocacy for left-wing candidates on that channel as there is for right-wing candidates on Fox News.
A Georgian woman who travels to another state for an abortion procedure could get 10 years. These are extreme hard policies.
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, I'm not sure. I mean, frankly, I don't know whether are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
I'm a journalist that asks questions.
The substance of the question was, do you think it's appropriate to jail women for having an abortion? If the answer is yes, what is Ben's problem with saying so?
Okay, so you're a supposedly objective journalist calling policies with which you disagree barbaric and suggesting only one side of the political aisle has ideas. So I just want to point out that I wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
Mr. Shapiro, I know that broadcasting in America is now so polarized that on one program you only have the left and another one you just have the right. My job is to question those who have strong views and put an alternative to them. If you were an anti-abortion person, I would be putting pro-abortion questions to you.
Maybe Ben thought that Andrew Neil was just going to be British Dave Rubin and that he'd be receiving the same hot stone massage he gets whenever he goes on Rubin's show and on Fox News. It seems to me like Neil was just posing devil's advocate questions, which is not at all an uncommon technique even in the States. John Stossel does it all the time. He's certainly no leftist, but when he's interviewing people espousing his side of an issue, he asks them questions that he thinks an opponent of his position would ask. They're usually straw men, but the point is that asking questions that challenge the interviewee is a perfectly standard approach to conducting an interview.
But you are
really would you call the pro-choice position?
So why don't you just answer my question,
sir? I'm happy to answer your question. Please answer this one. Would you suggest that a late-term abortion is brutal?
I'm not taking a view on this issue. I'm asking you the questions.
Sir, you just suggested that the pro-life position is inherently brutal and terrible, so I'm asking you, as an objective journalist, would you ask the same question to a pro-choice advocate by calling their position brutal and horrible?
What I'm asking you is that why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected.
The idea that a human life ought to be protected merely because it is a member of the human species is an ethical issue, not a scientific one. And it's not something Ben actually believes. He supports the death penalty, which is imposed upon members of the human species. I'm sure Ben probably has an ethical argument for why killing a convicted murderer is not comparable to killing a fetus, but don't pretend that you oppose abortion because science says it's a human. Because this tries to disguise an ethical preference as a scientific fact. He wants to frame the pro-choice position as some kind of science denialism, which is clearly disingenuous.
Now, back to my question to you. You purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down-the-middle network. It obviously is not, it never has been, and you as a journalist are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the Dark Ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left?
Well, probably because he does things like destroy the argument that US sanctions, not socialism, hurt Venezuela, which Ben should know about given that his own website, The Daily Wire, hosted an article about it.
I think some of the points too, because on your videos,
characterization of issues is part of the problem in the coarsening of public debate.
Well, maybe it's also part of your problem too, because we have from your YouTube videos, Ben Shapiro destroys the abortion argument. Ben Shapiro destroys transgenderism and abortion. Is that not a kind of coarse public discourse?
Well, are those videos labeled by me?
They're not labeled by Ben, but they are hosted on Ben's website. I just showed an example of the X destroys Y headline format. Either Ben has no problem with this, or his administration of his own website is rather lazy and irresponsible. Also, this is a dude that wrote a book called How to Debate Leftists and Destroy Them. So I doubt Ben really thinks there's any problem with coarse political dialogue.
I have no idea. But
Why are you picking out? Why are you?
views.
I have a question. Why are you picking out random YouTube videos put up by people who are not me?
Are you
and then attributing the titles to me?
Are you unhappy with the way they've been described?
I think that people can describe me however they please. It's a free country, and I'm all in favor of a public debate. If you watch the actual clips, they are generally civil conversations between me and somebody who disagrees with me.
You say in your new book, you suggest that America's largest struggle at the moment is, quote, the struggle for our national soul. We are so angry at each other right now. And I think that's true. I've just returned from the United States. But aren't you part of the problem with the way you go about your discourse, not the solution?
I think we can all do better in our discourse, but the fact that I've reached out to so many people across the aisle to have conversations with them is pretty evident. The fact that I was willing to walk from a publication that was paying me money over principle is pretty evident. The fact that I've called out President Trump, a member of a party of which I am a member, repeatedly when I think that he has done things that are immoral, I think is decent evidence that I'm looking at least for a civil conversation.
Here's the kind of civil conversation Ben Shapiro is looking for with people on the left.
Why should you debate somebody on the left? And when should you debate somebody on the left? The truth is, you shouldn't always debate people on the left. You know, when you're on college campuses, there are really only a few reasons to debate anyone on the left in the first place. The first is that you are forced to under the rules of the classroom for some odd reason. The second is because they're serving you food, which is a high likelihood, and they're going to spit in it unless you talk politics with them. And the only other reason is if the person happens to be an honest leftist. You found the one honest leftist in America, congratulations, it's unlikely. So the only other reason that you should ever have a conversation or be friends with anyone on the left is, and not even be friends, is if you are in public in front of a large audience, and then your goal is to humiliate them as badly as possible. That is the goal of the conversation. The goal is not to convince the person. The goal is not to make friends with that person. You know, if you want to make friends with the person, there's a whole different conversation you can have. But the conversations that are going to make the most difference on campus are the ones where you're in public in front of large groups of people or with a camera nearby, and your goal then is to make these people look as bad as possible.
Much civil, very conversation. Wow.
Well, as you say in your book, you say that there's quite a key phrase, we are so angry at each other right now. But as I say, aren't you part of that anger? Aren't you encouraging that anger? For example, you described Mr. Obama's State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist mentality in action.
Well, I think that if you want to argue with the characterization, then we can talk about what exactly his State of the Union address said. Is it charged language in politics? Sure. The problem that I have is not with charged language in politics, which I'm generally in favor of. I like a robust public debate and a very loud and spirited public debate. I have no problem with that whatsoever. What I'm talking about is the assumption that people with whom we disagree politically are inherently of bad character or, in your words, want to bring us back to the dark ages.
But again, it was your description of the State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist.
Maybe Ben would feel better if Andrew had called the laws in Georgia fascist, because I guess saying someone is fascist doesn't impugn their character nearly as much as saying they want to bring us back to the dark ages.
It seems to me that simply going through and finding lone things that sound bad out of context and then hitting people with them is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
How many decades do you think Ben has been waiting to taunt someone with the words, "I'm popular and you're not"?
Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't
answer
care.
the
I don't
questions?
frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
And I've never heard of you until I briefed myself for this. But that's not the issue. You have a
Then
new
why the hell
book
are you
out,
interviewing
and
me, sir?
it's an interesting book.
Why did Ben agree to an interview with this guy if he's never heard of him and obviously hadn't done any research about him? Andrew Neil at least looked into Ben's positions beforehand. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.